we are going to be taking a look at how you can use the FieldArray component that Formik has when building forms in React. Specifically, what it's good for is when you have an array of data. So here I have a little bit of setup that I did. I have Create React up and running, and I have a validation schema at the top. This is for yup, and this just has to do with validating the form. We're going to talk more about this later. You can ignore it for now. I have Formik set up here, and this is what I'm using to create the form. So this is when I'm talking about an array of data. We have an array of objects that we want to either add more objects into this data, or maybe we want to update the values, something like that. So that's what we're going to be handling. We're going to cover validation, showing error messages for all the array elements. And we're going to start from this blank little template that I have here. So I have Formik, I have some initial values, I have a people object, or I have an object of the initial values, and people is the only thing that we're going to be looking at in this one, and that is an array of objects. On submit is blank, and you'll notice inside of Formik here, I just have a text field and a button. So this text field is from Material UI, but it doesn't matter what UI kit you use, or if you write your own styles. And then the button here is just submit the form. All right, so this is where we're going to start from. And the first thing that I wanted to go over is you'll notice here, I just have the form submitting, right? There's a nice little handy Formik component just called form that we can wrap our form in. And then we don't have to worry about passing that in like that. So this is just a utility component that I'll usually use, just makes the code a little cleaner and more readable. So let's go ahead and look at this FieldArray component. So what I want to do is basically render my array of elements and be able to edit them. So we're going to say FieldArray, and this comes imported from Formik. I'm not sure why I didn't import it. There we go. And this is a render prop. You can also say render and pass in there. Looks like my VS Code is lagging. I think I may have too many plugins installed or something, because I've noticed VS Code lagging more lately. It could also be my Vim usage. So you can either use the render prop, or we can just pass into the child render prop like this. All right, so here is where we're going to basically put all our fields or map through the items. So here I'm going to, I guess we'll just have a div, and we'll put everything inside of it. We also need to give it a name of the array that we're iterating over. So in this case, I want this field array to handle the people. So I'm going to pass in the name people there. And so what we have access to is a couple of utility functions here, which affect this list here. So actually, why don't we start with what those utility functions do? So I'm going to create a button here, and it's going to have the type button. And I'm putting it as the type button, that way it doesn't submit the form. And we're just going to call it add to list. And when this is clicked, we're going to call one of the utilities. And the one we're going to add is push. And we'll just call push here. So here we just push whatever we want to add to the array. So in this case, copy this, a new person like that, and let's go ahead and use the ID scheme like we were doing, and we'll give this an initial value, Bob, and Bob too. And I went ahead and installed a library to generate IDs for me. So SureID. You can install the same library if you like to generate a unique ID, or you can use a different library if you like. But it's good to have a unique ID when dealing with array data. Okay, so this is basically just going to add an item to the end of the list. So you're going to see this is where Formik is very handy. It's going to handle the underlying adding to the list and re-rendering and updating the state all for us. We just call push and tell it what we want at the end of our list. So I'm going to save that, come over to my code over here, and we're going to say add to list. And of course, I don't really have anything displaying, so we don't say anything. So let's do that real quick. So I'm going to say values right here, and this is in regards to the Formik render prop. And at the bottom here, thanks to you guys in the comments in the last video, I know that we use the pre tag to render this nicely. So I'm going to say json.stringify the values just so we can see what our data looks like. And if we say null, comma 2, this will look nice. So save that. And cool. So we can see our data right now. We can see our Bob. If I add to the list, you'll notice we have a new item onto it. Okay. And again, we could use some of the other utilities, and feel free to play around with those, but push is probably the most common one. We're also going to look at the X, or removing, but we'll get to that in a second. All right, so we have add to list. Let's go ahead and actually render the array. So to do that, we are going to take the values and map over it. So values.people.map. And for each person, we're going to return something. So here is where I'm going to just render a div. And the key is going to be the ID of the person. And here's where I can render a text field. And I guess I'll show you guys one way to do it, where you basically inline the text field, and then I'm going to show you a better way, which we can use the field component from Formik. So let's start with how you might do this. So first, you're going to give this a name. So what the name is going to be is you say the array that it came from. So in this case, people. Then you give it the index, which you do in brackets. And we can get that from mapping over. And then you say whether it's the first name, ID, or last name. So I'm going to say dot first name. And then we can pass in the value p dot first name, and we can pass in the on change. And I don't think the field array has anything for this. Yeah, it's just for mutating the array itself. I think we just grab the handle change that Formik gives us up here. All right. So I'm going to save this, and I'm not going to bother with doing the last name right now, just because I'm going to show you a better way to do this. All right, so here's Bob, and you can see as I'm typing Bob in here is sure enough updating nicely. But you notice this is a pretty clean implementation, right? The hardest thing that we had to do was basically create this name. Other than that, Formik is handling the on change, which is a little tricky. So that's pretty cool. All right, so how can we do one better than this, right? Well, I guess since I just said this was a pretty clean method, I guess I should show you where it gets, less clean, is where we want to handle, say, errors. Basically, we're just going to start duplicating the logic for it. So this is going to come in with validation. So I'm going to put in my validation schema up here. So yup is a library that basically allows you to create a schema. That's what this is. And what the schema does is you can specify the shape of the object you expect and some properties of it. And if it doesn't meet those properties, it'll display an error, and it has a special integration with Formik that makes it nice and easy. So you can say the people I said was an array of objects, and the shape of the objects inside of the array should have a first name and last name. First name should be a max of 10 characters, and the last name, let's give it a min of 2 characters. I don't know why I picked 0. All right. So now this is going to have some errors. Now I'm using Material UI text field here, which I believe they have an error text field. I want to say they do. Let's just test this out real quick. I don't know if they do or not. Yeah, it's not showing something. Maybe it's just error. No, they don't have it. I think there's another way with Material UI which you can use to display errors. I forget what it is off the top of my head, and you may not be using Material UI anyway, so it's better I show you like another way to do it. So underneath the text field, we're just going to display an error. All right, so style, color red. So right, this is just us displaying an error. And of course, we want to display this error if this is greater than 10 characters long. All right, and we want to display that message. So the way we can do that is we can tap into the errors object. So if we print the errors object, we can see the value of it as stuff changes. So let's take a look at it first. You'll notice it is empty. And then as it gets longer, we get our first item. So you'll notice the error object tells us under people, then it is an array, and then the first item says first name, people 0, first name must be most 10 characters. Okay, so this is just to show you what the shape of the error message is. So basically, to get that error message, we use the name field. So there's a nice utility that Formik gives us that we can use the name to get the error. So we can say name here, and we're going to say error is getIn name. So what this getIn function does, and again this is coming from Formik, and that's going to give us the error message. And what it does is you'll notice the name up here says people, and this is my Vim lagging again, I think, because I just typed but it hasn't. There we go. What it's going to do is going to take this name and it's going to give us the error message associated with this name of the field. So you notice like people index 0 first name, that was like roughly this shape. Okay, so we have to pass in the object, in this case errors. All right. So we have our error message here, and we're going to display the error message. And just to be succinct, you can say error message. And by the way, it's going to be undefined if it doesn't find anything. We can say error message and this div here. So we're conditionally rendering the error message here. All right, let's go check it out. So as I'm typing, and as soon as it gets 10 characters or more, see the error message popped up. So as you can notice, we have a little bit more logic here now. And say if we wanted to do the last name field or a bunch of fields, we just duplicate this logic over and over and over again. And so this is where the field component from Formik comes into play. So we can create a custom form field that's going to handle this logic for us for each component. So to do that, I'm going to say const text. I'm going to just call it input, just because it's called text field up here. Don't want to duplicate that. All right, so inside of here, we're just going to render the error and the text field that we had there. So these two. And I'm going to wrap it in a fragment. And that's just because we have two components, we have to use a fragment there. So we have access to some props. They are called field props. If you're using TypeScript, you can get the annotation from Formik. And I'm just going to say any. Maybe that's the default though. Maybe I don't even need to bother. And so we have access to the field, which is going to handle all this for us. All we have to pass in is the name, which I think if we destructure the field, it has the value name on change value for us. So we just say ... field. And I forgot to actually handle blurring here, so it's going to handle blurring as well. Okay. And then we also have access to the form, and we can say form.errors if we want. And so now we still have access to the error message being able to compute that. And also you may want to do stuff like check if it's touched and stuff. You can do that as well. There's a touched property in Formik, but I'm not going to worry about that right now. All right, so now I have basically my custom input field, and I was able to render a material UI component, but again, you can render your own component, style it yourself, and then we can reuse this everywhere. So now to reuse this, we just say field, we give it a name, and I'm just going to copy paste this, and we specify the custom component, in this case our input, and normally you want to put this in a separate file, but just for simplicity's sake I'm just going to leave it here. And that is it. So we're going to import the field from Formik, and now we can get rid of all this stuff, and Formik is going to handle the field for us. So we're going to get all the same stuff that we had before. I messed something up. I think maybe up here, this looks fine. We have a key around this. Objects are not valid as a React child. If you meant to render a collection of children, use an array instead. I don't think it is this field that's messing things up. JK. So it looks like error message is getting messed up. Let's do a little debugging. So for some reason it sounds like error message is an object. Open up inspect. All right. So the name is an empty string for some reason. So then when get in is happening, oh, name, I should be getting it. This should be field.name. I'm not sure why TypeScript was not catching that for me. Okay, give that a save. So name is like some global thing right here. All right, so that's better now. Anyway, so the logic that is displaying the error and getting the error, we have encapsulated in this input, and we can reuse it very easily now. So you'll notice when actually calling it, very simple now. Let's make sure it works the same, displays the error message perfectly. So now I can just do last name here, and I am now rendering a first name, a last name, and I could do this for every single field that I wanted to. All right, so, and I guess this is the last name, right? So let's say I make it too small, you can see the error message. Make this too long, it's displaying both. Now I didn't do a great job of styling this, but this will give you the idea of how it works. And here it's displaying both error message. Can add some more things to the list. Fill them in so it's not super ugly. And there we go. I guess one last thing that we can do is add like an X here. And this is just to remove the item. And then we can just use the remove utility from the field array. And then we don't need to use the handle change right here. And we just give the index of the item that we want to remove. So if I just want to remove this one here, delete it. You can delete, delete, delete. Cool. So as you can see, handling arrays in Formik are actually not too bad, especially once we have created like a little utility field here. We have access to the form and the field data if we need to do anything to access the to the Formik form itself inside of here, and then we can just reuse this input very simply, and all the Formik is basically doing all the heavy lifting for us. The hardest part also is just making sure you have this name correct. That's very important following this structure. Now let's say I had another initial value, or in our form we just had another array. You would use another field array. So if I had a dogs, I'd create a new field array component, call it dogs, and I would do the same thing over again, like right here. But that is it for this video. I hope it gave you a better understanding of how to use the field array in Formik.